Ari, and just want to say welcome to everyone. I'm Tom Carlo, the General Manager of KPBS here in San Diego. And joining us for our Producers Club virtual event is Ari Shapiro, the co-host of NPR's All Things Considered. And Ari, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for your support of public broadcasting. Thank you for giving me an excuse to put on a blazer for the first time in 2 months. I'm happy to be joining you from my home studio where I broadcast All Things Considered.
And if I knew you were going to wear a blazer, I would have actually dressed up a little bit myself. No, I'm just.
I still got tennis shoes on.
Yes. Anyway, thank you very much. Before we officially get started with the questions that we have for you, I'm just going to read a short bio about Ari. It'd only take me about an hour and a half to get through your bio. But Ari,
all it needs to say is he spent his whole career at NPR.
Yes, I know, which I've spent my whole career at KPBS. Ari has been one of the co-hosts of NPR's All Things Considered since 2015, which you learned in our trivia questions. He's also reported from above the Arctic Circle and aboard Air Force One, which has to be a very cool thing to do. Ari spent 2 years at NPR's international correspondent based in London, and his overseas move came after 4 years as NPR's White House correspondent during the Barack Obama administration, first and second terms. Ari also embedded with the campaign of Republican Mitt Romney for the duration of the 2012 presidential race. He was NPR's justice correspondent for 5 years during the George W. Bush administration, covering debates over surveillance, detention, and interrogation in the years right after 9/11. Ari was part of an NPR team that won a national Edward R. Murrow Award for coverage of the Trump administration's asylum policies on the U.S.-Mexico border. The Columbia Journalism Review honored Ari with a laurel for his investigation into the disability benefits for injured American veterans. The American Bar Association awarded him the Silver Gavel for exposing the failures of Louisiana's detention system during Hurricane Katrina, and he was the first recipient of the American Judges Association American Gavel Award for his work on the U.S. courts and the American justice system. And at age 25, he won the Daniel Shore Journalism Prize for an investigation of methamphetamine use and HIV transmission. Wow. So Ari, thank you very much for joining us for our KPBS Producers Club virtual event.
Thank you for having me. I only wish I could be there in person in the beautiful San Diego sun. You've got an incredible station, and before this event began, Tom and I were just talking about the amazing pipeline of NPR talent that has come from KPBS.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you all know, everyone from Scott Horsley to Carrie Kahn, Adrian Florido, Dwayne Brown. It's a testament to the station that all of these incredible NPR reporters came from San Diego.
Yeah, we're losing them quickly because they get good here and then they move on to you guys. So I don't know if we're going to have enough to talk about because the last 2 months there really hasn't been a whole lot going on.
Just been one story.
I think what I would really like to know, and I'm sure everybody else is, what has it been like these last 2 months? What have you gone through from the COVID-19 starting to what is NPR and you have had to do? So just give us a little snapshot of what these last 2 months have been like for you and NPR.
I mean, nobody's ever lived through anything like this in the news business, in the economy, in the public health world, in any sector of society. I have, been involved in coverage of everything from 9/11 to wars, to climate change, to mass shootings. And there's never been anything that affects literally every sector of society and every country in the world as dramatically as this. So, of course, it started as a story in China, which we were on top of with our correspondents who live and work and are based there, bringing us those stories from China. And as it started to spread, I remember the first American city that really talked about having identifiable cases of COVID-19 was Seattle, which is where my brother lives with his wife and 2 kids. So I remember doing an interview with a woman who owns a pierogi bakery in Pike Place Market, the big tourist attraction of Seattle. And she talked about how little business there was. And I remember thinking, wow, Pike Place and Seattle are really going to suffer. But even then, it didn't occur to me that the whole country would shut down. My niece and nephew's school was canceled, as eventually most schools around the country were. And I started teaching them a weekly class online. We started this thing called shapiroschool.org, where every week I teach them a current events lesson and we upload it to YouTube so others homeschooling their kids could use it. But I guess the point is, even then I was thinking, this is going to be really tough for Seattle. And then NPR started developing work from home contingency plans. And I remember thinking, well, I could imagine having a few producers and editors at home. I can't really envision a scenario in which we would ever have a host at home, although that's doable because for years I've been able to update the show from where I am right now. I've had this home studio set up because the show is live on the East Coast and then we update it for the West Coast feeds. And then they said, well, let's see if we can do it with one host from home. And then suddenly it was two hosts from home. And now the last time that I've been in headquarters was more than a month ago. And when I was there was a one person in the elevator at a time policy. There was a directional flow on the of the office layout so that you only walk, I can't remember whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise. We have the main studio and then the secondary studios. The secondary studios had a sticker on the door that said, when you use the studio, please remove the sticker in its entirety so that the disinfecting clean team knows to go back and re-disinfect the studio. NPR, I've actually been really impressed with how ahead of the curve we've been on this. From early on, each daily show had red team, green team, blue team that was rotating through the building so that we do have a core staff. I think it's now 7 people for all things considered working in the building at any given time. And that staff rotates every week. And at the end of each day that they're working in the office, they fill out a close contact form where they list all the people they've been in touch with so that if anybody does test positive for COVID-19, there's contact tracing easily available. Up until a few weeks ago, every pre-produced interview that we did had to be recorded by somebody at headquarters. But starting a few weeks ago, I began recording and producing my own interviews from home with the help of a producer and an editor, so that what we do is the producer sets up a Zoom call. I put the earbuds into the computer so I can hear the Zoom call. And then I put these earphones over the earbuds so I can hear myself on the recording that I'm making. And then we sync all of that up. And so the stuff that you hear on the air these days is much more likely to be live than not, because it takes fewer people and less manpower, person power, to put a live interview on the air than it does a pre-produced interview. But if you hear a pre-produced interview, many, many more steps have gone into making it happen than was the case, even just a few months ago. And we have no idea when we're going to be back to work either. It's amazing to me every day to see what it takes to put a 2-hour show like Morning Edition or All Things Considered on the air, to do that with so few people working in the building. And then in addition, doing this new show that we stood up, The National Conversation, 5 nights a week, is something that has just boggled the mind. I realize I'm going on, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. So really incredible.
Tell us a little bit more about The National Conversation, because that's like double duty. You've got and you're bringing in Michelle Martin, and I know Michelle isn't she on the West Coast?
Yeah, so Michelle hosts The National Conversation Wednesdays and Thursdays, in addition to hosting All Things Considered on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. Right. And then I host The National Conversation Monday, Tuesday, Friday, in addition to hosting All Things Considered on many, but not all weekdays. So I'm not hosting the program. I'm not hosting All Things Considered on the weekdays this week. So the National Conversation came about because very early on in this pandemic, we were talking about how we meet the needs of listeners. And I remembered that right after 9/11, NPR stood up an overnight version of Talk of the Nation that was hosted by Scott Simon. And it was something like I don't know, midnight to 4 a.m. every night or something like that. And basically it was just taking calls and letting listeners sort of say what was on their minds. And it I think provided a service that was really needed in that time. Since then, NPR folded Talk of the Nation and got rid of the call screening technology that we had. And so as we were thinking about what would best serve listeners now, we realized that taking live calls was not an option, but we knew that we wanted to answer listener questions. And so this team of producers and editors, basically in just a few days, stood up this 1-hour program that we're now doing every night where we answer listener questions. And we get all of the questions in advance, and we get people to send in voicemails, and then we try to have somebody live in at least a couple segments each night, so we have that feel of a live exchange with a caller. But it's been amazing to see, first of all, given all the logistical hurdles, working from home, et cetera. Second of all, given that we don't have the technology for live call screening, how we are able to answer all of these listener questions every night. I mean, we've gotten thousands of questions in and answered hundreds of them. And it's really felt like we're doing a public service, and also reassuring that a company that's been around as long as NPR is able to be as nimble as that and create something as quickly and responsive as that.
So what is going to be the future of the national conversation? I know it's really focused just on COVID-19 as we're dealing with that, but is it going to be something that's going to be with us for a while, or will it slowly go away?
Well, I think it was actually just announced this week that they are going to sunset the program at the end of this month, at the end of May. Mm-hmm. And there are a few reasons for that. Partly, the show is held together with sort of like Scotch tape, and everybody's on loan from every other show, and we stood it up in a heartbeat. And it feels like to make it last through the summer, we would have to have a real investment of resources and people at a time when NPR is actually making dramatic cutbacks. Everybody, myself included, has taken a salary cut. We're seeing this massive economic crunch really affect public broadcasting on every level, from local to national, which, by the way, is another reason that it is so important and crucial and valuable to have people like everybody who is on this webinar supporting public broadcasting. It is an absolute crisis right now. And so that's one reason that we've decided to sunset it at the end of the month. Another reason is that the questions are starting to become a little bit similar. You know, a lot of people are saying, can I get it from my air conditioner? When is my check going to come in the mail? And there are ways to reimagine that. But again, I think that would take a level of time, resources, and allocation that are just not available to us right now. But we're going to keep the concept and frame of the national conversation and hopefully stand it up in the future as needed, whether that's about a second spike of COVID-19, or if there's a vaccine and there are questions about distribution and efficacy and safety, or if there's a different story entirely apart from COVID-19 that we decide the national conversation would make sense. It's something now that we can do for a day or a week or a month or 6 months. And so it's a kind of model that I think we can easily stand up when it feels appropriate.
You know, you just mentioned about NPR and going through some cuts and things. And, you know, us in KPBS, we couldn't do what we're doing without people who have joined us today from our KPBS Producers Club. But we've gone through a situation where we've also noticed some businesses that have had to defer their underwriting and their corporate support because of the challenges they are having. We've also seen some members have to back away. But we're in a unique situation. I think NPR is the same way. It's that we've seen some economic downturns, but our audiences are skyrocketing because people need us more than ever. And we also see it on our TV side because we also have the PBS and the television side. But our customers, you might say, our viewers, our listeners, and the people who click on our digital platforms is up. So it's a unique business we're in, and I'm glad we're providing this service.
And I'm very aware that people who are laid off from their jobs are, or, you know, whose retirement account has shrunk, shouldn't be unable to turn to public broadcasting just because they can't donate. But it makes it all the more vital that the people who are in a position to be able to donate step up in the way that so many of you on this webinar are doing. So we're really grateful and appreciative of that. Thank you.
Yes, and we are very grateful and appreciative of all the people, especially the people that are joining us today. I wanted to ask you about something that we talk about because we're primarily a news operation here in San Diego with our local news effort, and we just want to, compliment the great work that comes from you, from NPR. I like to say we give everybody one-stop shopping, regional, national, and international in one place. But I've kind of sat in on some of our editorial meetings, and I want to get your take on this. It's a challenge right now in our business to figure out what we're not going to report to people. And I say that because we have our reporting beats, you have your reporting beats, we have our normal stories about people, whether it's, health, education, the environment, military, politics, science, technology, but we're so into COVID-19 that it's consuming every walk of our life. And
Yeah.
we also have to start preparing for the presidential election in November. So give us a little insight on some of the editorial discussions you and the editorial team has on terms of how are you choosing some of these stories and not dealing with the ones that you would normally be doing, which were important issues. It's got to be
Yeah.
a challenge.
So on all things considered, we have an editorial meeting every morning, and now that meeting takes place on Zoom. And that's an opportunity for everybody, from the interns to the senior executives to the hosts, to pitch stories that they think should be on the show that day. And it was, maybe 6 weeks or 2 months ago that we realized the meeting was all COVID-19 pitches. And so our senior producer said, all right, at 10 minutes till the end of the meeting, we are going to cut off the COVID-19 pitches. There will be a Slack channel for all of the COVID-19 pitches that we didn't get to in the meeting. And the last 10 minutes of the meeting are going to be non-COVID-19 pitches. And so, we try to look at the board every day. When I say the board, we have the rundown of the show. It's like 2 columns. Each column is 1 hour. The top of the column is the A segment, where it's like testimony on Capitol Hill or whatever the big story of the day is. And then the bottom of the column, sort of the end of the hour, tends to be the arts interviews. And when we look at the board, we try to say, what's our balance of national and international? Where is the joy, surprise, and uplift? What mix of voices do we have? If somebody is tuning into any given 20-minute chunk of this program, what are they going to hear? And so we try to get that mix and we try to get that balance. But the thing is, these days, when we talk about the military, what the military is dealing with is the spread of COVID-19.
Right.
When we talk about the economy, the story of the economy is the enormous impact of COVID-19. I mean, it's what I was saying earlier, that COVID-19 has touched literally everything. If you think about the sections of the newspaper, from sports to arts, sports are canceled because of COVID-19. Artists are making art in a different way because of this pandemic. So in a way, even the lighter feature stories, on some level, you feel like they have to allude to or mention or acknowledge this reality that we're living in, just because it has touched everything.
Mm-hmm. It is amazing and everything. You know what I want to do is I want to get to some of our questions, and let's see if we can. We want to encourage you is to go ahead and post your question on the the question and answer area. Let's see. Our first one. Patty Nussbaum asked us, did Ari ever record with Pink Martini?
Yes, actually. Hi, Patty. I have done 1 or 2 tracks on each of the last 4 albums the band recorded. The first album I did with them was called Splendor in the Grass, and that was 2008 or 9. And the first track I ever recorded with them was called But Now I'm Back. And then I did something on their next album, which was called Get Happy. And then I did something on the Holiday album. I did a couple tracks on the Holiday album, Joy to the World. And then I did 2 tracks on the latest album, Je Dis Oui. So there are 4 different albums that I've recorded with them on.
Very good. And we have another one from Niru. She wants to know, what is the photograph in the background behind?
It's funny. This is my guest bedroom, and it's just where I happen to have my studio set up. And I have not changed anything since I started working from here every day. But that's a photograph that a friend of ours took in Puerto Rico. It's some kind of sculpture that was on the street, and our friend took it at sunset. There's something about this is the webcam on my work laptop that makes everything look green.
Yes,
So
yes,
the room is not as green as it looks on this webcam, but neither is the photograph.
yes. The next question comes from Jane Hopkins, and it deals with Michelle Martin. And I have to say, I am a huge Michelle Martin fan. I mean,
Me too.
she did an event for us a couple of years ago. So Jane wants to know, will Michelle ever run for office?
Ah, I've never asked Michelle, but most journalists that I know have no interest in running for office. I'm guessing
Yeah,
it's probably true of Michelle, but I wouldn't want to speak for her.
yeah. Jim Bowersock asks, I'm concerned about the courts and the changes that are going under the radar during COVID-19. How are you monitoring this, or are you monitoring this?
Yeah, I mean, we have journalists whose beat that is. Nina Totenberg does a lot of stories on judicial confirmations in the courts. So does Ryan Lucas, who's our justice correspondent. We have a second justice correspondent, Carrie Johnson, who has been on a year-long academic fellowship at Harvard. She had a Nieman Fellowship that's just wrapping up. So you'll start to hear Carrie Johnson on the air again more, and this is something that she's covering as well.
Very good. The next question comes from Andrew Bowen, and Andrew actually is one of our best journalists here in San Diego.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Politics, and he's one. If we're going to continue the sending people to NPR, Andrew is right up there as one that could go to NPR. But he wanted to know, what's been your favorite interview or segment since the pandemic began?
Huh. I just got to interview Patti LuPone, and she
Oh,
was just as delightful as you would hope. She is starring in a new show on Netflix called Hollywood. It's a Ryan Murphy show where she plays a larger-than-life former silent film star who becomes a studio boss. And she's just been everywhere during the pandemic. She was in Stephen Sondheim's 90th birthday celebration. She was supposed to have been on Broadway right now in Company. And she was just a delight. It was wonderful. The only thing is, our producer, Mallory, was very clear to her that as she talked to me, she should not have me on speakerphone because, as I said, we were each recording ourselves. And if you have me on speakerphone, then it's bleeding and you get two of me. And of course, Patty put me on speakerphone. So Mallory had to go to all kinds of lengths to make the interview actually sound good, which you would never know when you listen to it. It sounded great, but that was amazing work by Mallory.
very good. Rebecca Lavaseur asks, Ari, did you always want to be in media business, especially working for NPR? How did that happen? Or why didn't you stay in music?
You know, Rebecca, I went to Yale and I majored in English and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so when I was finishing college, I applied for everything I could think of, including an NPR internship. And I got rejected for an NPR internship. And then I found out that Nina Totenberg hires her own interns. And so I applied to her. And it's not that I wanted to work in media so much. I just always been an NPR listener. And so I thought, you know, NPR seems like a great place to work. And when I showed up, it turned out that it was. So I just never left.
So you went right from college to working in the Supreme Court.
Working in the Supreme Court, more or less. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. How was it working with Nina?
She's great. I mean, she remains a mentor and friend and icon. And she was the first person to teach me about journalism.
Yeah, she's very, very incredible. I was at an NPR event a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, and they did a session called The Mothers of NPR.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the amazing things about NPR is that because we were hiring women to do hard news
when nobody else was.
Nobody else was,
Yeah.
we have all these people like Mara Liasson and Linda Wertheimer and Nina Totenberg who are sort of like, you know, the founding mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Cokie Roberts, who sadly passed away recently.
Yeah, yeah. How did you get it? Were you into music as you were growing up? I mean,
yeah, you know, I did musical theater, I did choir, I played the piano, but when I started in journalism, I thought that was all over. And then one day, Thomas Lauderdale, the band leader for Pink Martini, said, "Why don't you sing a song on our next album?" And I thought, well, that's never going to happen, but sure. And then I went out and recorded this song, but now I'm back. And then he said, well, we're going to need to find a time for you to perform live with us. So why don't you come to the Hollywood Bowl? So the first time I ever sang with a band live was in front of 18,000 people at the Hollywood Bowl. And the rest is history.
Well, we have another question from Bruce Hopkins. He wants to know, will Michelle Obama ever run for office?
I have no idea. You'll have to ask Michelle Obama.
Yeah. From Carol, one of my biggest concerns for this political season is the tendency of media to cover presidential press conferences from start to finish and the free exposure advantage this gives them. What will NPR do to make sure that equal time is given to the opposition?
It's a good question, and it's the power of the incumbency. You know, NPR doesn't carry Trump press conferences uninterrupted. At the beginning of the pandemic, we did for a little while, and then NPR's managers decided that there were just too many falsehoods that we were spending too much time having to correct and fact check in real time. And so instead, we would give local stations the option of carrying it on a separate channel if the local stations wanted to, but the NPR national broadcast would monitor the press conference for news and report that news accordingly. But the fact is, the president has power, the presidency has power that the president's opponent does not, the person running for office. And so I think it's incumbent on us to accurately report what each candidate says they will do if they are the winner in the 2020 elections. But it's also incumbent upon us in real time to talk about what the president is doing. And that's something that the presumptive Democratic nominee is not doing. He's a full-time candidate. And so, you know, it's a difficult question of balance. But I do share your concern about carrying live presidential press conferences uninterrupted. And I think that's something that NPR wisely has decided to no longer do.
Yeah, it has definitely been a tough question for us too, because we have daily briefings from our mayor and the head of our county board of supervisors, and then plus from Governor Newsom. So it really does cut in, and we wrestle with that story on what is the best thing to present to our audience. Peter wanted to ask a question that he'll understand if you're not going to answer it, but it is, what has been your least favorite interview during your career? And if you don't want to answer that one directly, he also followed up with how do you deal with someone that you're answering tough questions to, but they never really answer the question? They just, beat around the bush or go in a different direction.
Yeah. So I always have I often get, what's your favorite interview that you've done in your career? And I never have a good answer for that. And there's just like too many, and it's hard to compare one great interview with, somebody in the middle of a war zone to an interview with a movie star. They just like apples and oranges. And for the same reason, it's hard for me to identify like a worst interview. But it's much easier to answer the question about if somebody is dodging or refusing to answer, which is that sometimes it's enough for the listener to hear that the person is not answering the question. And so if you ask it a couple of times and you say in the second time, I appreciate that blah, 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 paraphrasing whatever you just said, but my question was, and then repeat the question.
Yeah.
And then the person again doesn't answer. The listener is smart enough to figure out what's going on and judge for themselves whether it's appropriate for the person to not answer or how they feel about the fact that the person didn't answer. But I can't force someone to answer a question that they're not answering. Sometimes it's just incumbent on me to make it clear to the listener that I've asked more than once, the person isn't answering, we're going to move on.
Very good. This is from Janie, and she wants to know, do you write most of your stories that you report on, or does somebody else prepare them for you?
So as a host, everything that I'm involved with has me, an editor, and a producer. And this has, for me, been the biggest change about going from being a reporter to being a host, is that as a reporter, I was more or less a one-man show. And as a host, each day, there are so many different things that I'm involved in that I have to be able to trust the team that I'm working with and say, okay, I've got these 5 things on my plate today. These 2, I'm going to really dig in deeply and focus on a lot. These 2, I'll read a couple articles and collaborate. And this one, I'm just going to trust the editor and producer team and glance at what they've given me. And so, excuse me, there's a different, right now I'm working on a big feature that's going to air tomorrow about the patchwork of reopening rules and regulations across the country. I'm working on that with a team, but I'm writing every word of that myself.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have an interview with the local station reporter in Louisville about the shooting of Breonna Taylor, that's something that I will probably let my editor and producer talk to the Louisville reporter about, and then I'll glance over the script and make sure that everything in it looks good and makes sense to me, but I might not write every word of the intro and the questions. But it really varies from one to the next, and it's forced me to let go of sort of my inclination to be a perfectionist, because I know that on any given day I have so many things I'm involved with that I can't give all of them 100% of my attention. And as much as I might want in a given program to put a star next to certain pieces and say, listen closely to this, and put parentheses around other ones and say, listen less closely to these, I know that it's just a whole show that people are going to listen to in its entirety, or piecemeal. But they don't know what I'm particularly invested in and what I'm less invested in.
Well, as good broadcasters as you and I are, we want to stay on time. We have lots more questions to go, but I think
all right,
we'll end it with that. But I do want to just add one more. It says, are you hearing concerns from prominent politicians about the November 3rd election being impacted by the pandemic?
Absolutely. I mean, this goes back to what you were saying about, we need to cover the 2020 elections. We do, but the 2020 elections are going to be defined by this pandemic.
Yeah.
Everything from how the candidates campaign to how people will cast their ballots. These fights are happening at the state, local, and federal level right now, and it's going to be a huge story over the next 6 months.
Very good, very good. Well, let me go give a few closing comments, and then I'll thank you in just a second. First, everybody for the KPBS Producers Club that joined us today for this delightful conversation, and thank you, Ari, very much. We have two more coming up shortly. One will be on June 2nd, on June 3rd at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's going to be with an interview with Stephanie Ayanian, who is the director and producer of the documentary What Will Become of Us, which is a documentary that follows 6 Armenian Americans as they navigate through the Armenian landscape while grappling with the identities of the 100th year anniversary of the Armenian genocide. That will be a documentary that airs on Tuesday night, June 2nd at 9 o'clock. We'll have a Producers Club event with Stephanie on the 3rd. And then on June 19th at 12:30 in the afternoon, we're going to have a Producers Club event, a virtual event with the executive producer of the PBS program Nature with Fred Kaufman. And he's going to give a behind the scenes look at what it's like to put on that great program of there. But Ari, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you very much. You are such an icon to us here in San Diego. I thank you for your great friendship and your great support and your great work. And all I can say is thank you so much. Keep up the great work, and we are always going to be listening. And I do want to say that all things considered, in the San Diego radio marketplace with 40 plus stations, is the #1 most listened to program in afternoon drive. Well, maybe I can't say drive right now, but it is. So thank you.
I love to hear it. Thank you for having me, and I hope next time we can do it in person. Thanks for the invitation and for showing up, everybody.
Very good. And thank you all, everybody. Have a great